My name's Temp Keller. I'm the founder and president of an organization called RISE. Like many things in K through 12, ours is an acronym, Resources for Indispensable Schools and Educators. But RISE is basically just working to recognize really good, effective teachers in low-income public schools and then retain them, bring market forces into public education to recognize talent. So this is, it's a bit of a humility contest for me, as I joked with these guys over email, to be here, because I'm 5 years into building an organization and we have some real experts, but I think that gives me, along with you guys, I share your perspective. I'm looking to these folks as the real leaders in social entrepreneurship. So I'm going to introduce them just very briefly, but I want to quickly try and set the stage here. The title of this little segment is The Next Social Leaders. And so I think it's fitting to note that, of all the panels today, there are about 7, I believe, on social entrepreneurship as a strand. This is the first one. And I think it's a fitting first one because, really the write-up for this asks the question, well, what is the future of social entrepreneurship? And it sounds hokey, but honestly, you're it. The future of social entrepreneurship are people like you sitting in this room who could become social entrepreneurs, who are going to start this morning by getting exposure to people like this, and you're going to get inspired. And so my goal is simply that each of you will leave this first conversation in social entrepreneurship excited to go to the next one. And there are, in terms of just to quickly set up the next ones, there's how-to stuff on funding strategies, getting off the ground as a social entrepreneur. There's sector-specific stuff like medical technology, ecotourism, for-profit education. So we're here to whet your appetite in the hopes that you'll go to the next one. So a quick show of hands. How many people here in the room are MBAs who are thinking about doing the social entrepreneurship thing post? Wow, we like that.
Great.
You guys can go home now. How many are professionals? So just people who are in the working world but thinking about doing the social entrepreneurship thing. Nice. And how many at this point? Just so we're going to talk a little bit about measuring impact. So we need a baseline. And so how many at this point are planning on going to another conference on social entrepreneurship today, or another little breakout? Okay. If we were, okay, we got a good sense. So we're going to ask that question at the end. So quickly, what's great about this panel is we've got early stage Jenny or Richards is working to identify and support talented social entrepreneurs. I'll give you 2 little things that they're too humble to share with you. Not only is she an MBA from Stanford, as well as having her master's from the Ed School, she's also been a judge at a number of social entrepreneurship award selections, such as Echoing Green and Fast Company, so she knows her stuff. Kirsten is the principal and founder of Social Enterprise Group, LLC. It's a company that specializes in building organizational capacity to achieve more efficient and effective social enterprise, so kind of middle stage, and obviously knows her stuff as well as one of Puget Sound's 40 Under 40 and the vice chair of the board for Social Entrepreneurship Alliance. And our third panelist is Laura Scher, who's the chairperson and CEO of an organization called Working Assets. They're a long-distance credit card and wireless company dedicated to building a world that is more just, humane, and environmentally sustainable. So, and she's been doing this quite a while. So she's our later stage entrant here. And in fact, she was actually the keynote of this very conference 10 years ago. So I think that says something about her staying power. She's grown her organization to over $140 million in annual revenue, $35 million of which they've given away to progressive causes over the years. So obviously an insanely talented group. We're going to, as far as format, we're just going to take 5 minutes for each panelist to speak and kind of introduce themselves, introduce their thoughts on this topic. of what is the future of social entrepreneurship. And we'll keep the back and forth on the panel pretty brief because I know we've all just been through an hour and a half lecture, and I believe the former vice president is, he's gotten a little more on his toes, but it was still an hour and a half where we were all sitting and listening, so I think we'll open it up sooner than later to the audience. So, Jenny, you want to?
Hi, everyone. Our foundation supports social entrepreneurs starting new nonprofits. So the basis for our selection is partly on the model for social change in the nonprofit arena. We look for models that are new and innovative, they're risk-taking, and they are scalable, so national or global in scale. And then the second half of our selection process is on the person. Leadership is extremely important in any startup, for-profit or nonprofit, arguably more important than at any stage. A good leader is able to pull together an incredible team, a strong board, is able to fundraise, is able to think about the future and build for the future. So when we pick the nonprofits in which we invest, a very big part of our due diligence is on the person. And when I think about the future of social entrepreneurship, I really think about a melding of the best of all arenas, the best of the business world, the best of the nonprofit world. And I think about the leaders really planning for scale and for growth early on. And this is hard to do on a nonprofit or any social change organization because funding is tough to get in the early stages. It's hard to get funding for capital expenditure. And that's what I do is run around trying to tell the funding community that this sector needs unrestricted operating funds and it needs money up front. No venture capitalist would ever ask a company to start out for very long with one person and no support for any kind of administrative CFO or anything like that, but the nonprofit world does it all the time. So we really think that if you build the infrastructure up front, you'll have a much better chance of building a strong organization in the future. And that's why we focus on scaled models from the very beginning and leaders who think about scale from the beginning. It's amazing the difference between a local organization who 10 years down the road tries to scale and somebody who wanted to scale right from the beginning. So I hope that the future has all of you in it, and I hope that you all come knocking on my door. And I also hope that you think about models that may or may not have revenue generating pieces to them. It depends on what problem you're trying to solve. But I do hope that you think about starting things in the nonprofit sector and not just in the for-profit sector. And I sometimes think that the business schools lean towards social enterprise when a lot of social problems cannot be solved through the business sector. Some can. But the nonprofit arena is becoming quite a powerful place for great leaders, and the funding sources are really loosening up, and it's a great place to be.
I guess I'll just give a little bit of background of how I ended up in the field of social enterprise. I had always kind of felt like there were these two parts of myself that didn't quite connect, and it felt wrong to me that they didn't connect. My degree is in international business, and I went straight from business school a month later into the Peace Corps and went to Mali, West Africa, and served as a small enterprise development volunteer. And now when I look back on it, I would say that that was my first real introduction to social enterprise, even though it certainly wasn't called that. And then came straight out of the Peace Corps into KPMG, Pete Marwick, and jumped right into the, at the time, Big Six consulting world, and just really was very eager to just climb that corporate ladder as fast as I could, but ended up in a group within KPMG that focused on working with large health and human service agencies. And I began kind of specializing in working with child welfare and public health agencies, mostly state agencies, and learned a lot. I was working with everybody from kind of high-level state policymakers to driving around rural Louisiana talking to on-the-line public health and social workers. And so, again, I was kind of doing this, working at KPMG, but, being very, very ingrained in the very real social issues of our country. And I left there to go to work for one of our clients, which was Casey Family Programs, which is a large child welfare foundation that's based in Seattle, and worked as their administrator of strategic planning and kind of orchestrated this enormous strategic planning process for them. But during that time, I was privileged enough to be able to be in a place where I had the resources to hire kind of some of the best thought leaders from around the country, and started learning a lot about the field of this kind of emerging field of social enterprise. And there were people like Laura who'd been doing it longer than that, but it hadn't really had a name to it. And it was beginning to have more of a name and some structure around it. And it just all of a sudden resonated for me, and this idea of mixing social mission and kind of business acumen just kind of hit it for me, and I felt that I had to work in social enterprise. But of course, at the time, there wasn't anything on Monster or in the want ads under the heading of social enterprise. So I took kind of a probably naive leap and started my consulting firm with no clients. But knowing that I just had to do this, and that I felt that I would do best in a sink or swim kind of a situation. And so I started my company not just to do consulting work, but really as consulting for me as the vehicle of contributing to the field and building the field of social enterprise. And now have continued to grow, not only in just doing consulting work around, early kind of, is social enterprise even right for your organization, to the development, like feasibility studies and business concepts and business planning, then helping clients later on look at replicating those businesses. But we're also now working with Bainbridge Graduate Institute, which is up in the Puget Sound area, to develop a curriculum that's 3 months, but it's 9 days over 3 months, to take teams of social entrepreneurs through this very intensive methodology to help them really flesh out their social venture models. But we're scaling that then nationally and hopefully eventually internationally through a network of licensees that would be delivering these kind of in their local communities. And that work is particularly important to me because I feel very passionate about building the field and believe that there's a real gap in the field in terms of access to kind of consistent and efficient and effective technical assistance for social entrepreneurs that are out there. And I've felt that there had to be some way to scale that beyond the many, many kind of individual consultants that are out there doing work. I often get asked the question of, is social enterprise kind of a flash in the pan? Is it, just today's kind of hot new topic? And when I come to conferences like this and sit in a room like this, and when Temp asks the questions of who's wanting to go into this field, this is my proof. And this is the kind of thing that I reference when people ask me that question, that I believe that it's absolutely not a flash in the pan. It's a complete shift in thinking in the way that we address not only social issues, but the way that we address business. And this conference and all of you here are proof of that, and I just really encourage you to keep it up.
So thank you. At the risk of dating myself further than just 10 years, 20 years ago I was sitting in your seats, but I say that completely metaphorically because there was no net impact. There was no Students for Responsible Business, and I was actually on the other coast. So I was at Harvard Business School, graduating, trying to decide what to do with my life, and like you, sort of sat there and said, well, I'd like to go work at a nonprofit. I mean, there were really in those days nonprofits and for-profits, but I don't know how to do anything, so all I have is an MBA. So sorry, but this is kind of true. So unless you've had great work experience as an MBA, we really don't know how to do very much. But so I didn't think a nonprofit would hire me. So I came to San Francisco from the East Coast and started looking for what I call the real job. And knew I wanted to somehow combine my interest in being in the nonprofit sector, but with all this training I had just had in how to run a company. And so I was lucky to help start a company. So I like what Jenny said. I mean, we didn't start thinking we were going to, I certainly never dreamed I'd be sitting here today, 20 years later, to tell you that I started a company that is still around and has achieved all the things it has achieved. I started a company because, like you, I could take lots of risks. So, if it didn't work, I'd go get another job. I mean, there are jobs. So I said, okay, I'll go help start a company that I really believe in, and I have nothing to lose. I did everything. I did T accounts. We didn't have Quicken when I started working assets. So to do the books, I did T accounts. I sort of came up with the first strategic plan. We had an idea. Our idea was, how do you invent products for people to spend in a social responsible way? We actually started as a subsidiary of a mutual fund company. And but I was sort of 25 years old and had to figure out, how do you build a business? How do you market? And the sort of adage in those days, there was no money pouring into anybody. So in those days, how do you sell your product before you run out of money? So that was our goal, is how to sell our product. So our first product was a credit card, which we still have today, which looked like everybody else's Visa and MasterCard, except every time you use them, we donated money to nonprofit groups. And when you ask if this is a flash in the pan, in 1985, this was new. I mean, Ben & Jerry's, you could only buy the ice cream if you drove to Vermont and went to the scoop shop and a gas station. The Body Shop was still overseas. I mean, we really had no role models. But slowly, people started realizing that they wanted to do business with a company whose values they shared. So that's sort of the origin of it. And a lot of it happened around Earth Day of 1990, when hefty garbage bags said that they were recyclable. And everyone started going, hello, this is a big plastic bag. I mean, what's it going to, how many thousands of years is this going to sit in landfill? You can't say that. That's not true. And we're consumers, and we're going to hold you to your statements. And we want to know that you actually are trying to make progress in developing products that are sustainable or are good for the environment. And so consumers are the ones who drove this whole movement. So who started saying, we care what companies do. We don't want to buy from companies that are, you go back to Nestle, the boycott of Nestle, which was giving baby formula to nursing moms in Africa to get them to stop being able to nurse. All of a sudden, they had no milk, and they had to buy Nestle's baby formula, and they had dirty water, and they didn't have enough money to buy enough formula, so they started starving their babies. And this was sort of the beginning of consumers saying, we care what you do. We're not going to buy your chocolate in America because you're killing babies. So consumers drove the desire to know what a company was like and what their products looked like. So don't forget that a lot of social responsible business starts with the consumer. So we were asked to talk about what social entrepreneurship means, and of course we built Working Assets without those two words. So I tend not to think about what it means, but what it creates. So I think it creates really wonderful things, and you guys have brought lots of wonderful things to us. But it creates nonprofits like Jumpstart, which was actually started by some Yale undergraduates, but now run by a Harvard MBA. And their philosophy is, if we intervene at very early ages for children, we can help get the preschoolers caught up by the time they go to kindergarten and inner city schools. There's a former executive from Microsoft who went to the Himalayas when he left, and he said, they have no libraries here. Why do they have no libraries? They can't afford to buy books, but can't they afford to borrow? Can't we build them libraries? So he's built 2,000 libraries in like 5 countries in a very short. Since 1998. So those are social.
2000.
Since 2000.
They
won one of your awards.
Yeah.
So there are lots of examples, but I also don't want to forget about the for-profit examples. So there are for-profit examples, and since we only have a 5 minute, I want to tell you about that. You can't always start a Working Assets. In hindsight, we were lucky and we were good at what we did, but it was both of those things. But you can go into a regular company and be socially responsible. So think of how the executives at Toyota feel about the people who convinced them to build the hybrid model, right? And think of how Ford feels that Toyota built the hybrid engine and they need to lease it. And they're sitting here today with Toyota selling lots and lots of cars and Ford paying a lot of money to Toyota for the hybrid. So the people were social entrepreneurs inside Toyota who said, we're going to, they may not have predicted what was going to happen with current gas prices, but they knew that the right thing to do was to reduce dependence on oil. So how do you do that? One technology is a hybrid engine. So I encourage you, while you're looking at what you're doing, is that you may not be able to start an organization and now there's money for you guys, and there's mentors for you, and there's all these things that didn't exist 20 years ago. But you also could go to GM, and as I don't like to say this because Working Assets has donated $47 million, and we have this great activist program, and we've been fighting drilling in the Arctic, and we think we won, and we think we won, and we think we won, and yesterday we won again, so we don't know how long we won, that they're not going to drill there. But so we've done all these things, but the person who who made Toyota make the hybrid, or you could come up with lots of examples. They have really big impacts. So don't underestimate that the impact at very large corporations in this world are really big, which is one of the things we're going to talk about, which is measuring impact. But I'll leave that to you.
Yeah, it's a perfect transition. I think this in the actual write-up, we have this kind of division, and this is, I shouldn't say it's a division, but it is the nonprofit for-profit. It's the social entrepreneur. Often in the nonprofit example, it's the social enterprise in the for-profit example. And since we have such great experience with both, and because, again, this is kind of our first conversation in social enterprise for the day, I think we should first spend our time here. Nonprofits, the idea is, okay, it's not just enough to do good, you want to do good well. And so excited to hear from Jenny about this idea of, how do you know if a social entrepreneur is doing good well? And without, we're still going to keep it kind of high level without getting too into all of the metrics. But then when we think about social enterprise, okay, now we're trying to do well while doing good. And talking about some of the interesting anecdotes that come up there. So I'll just let you guys take it away again.
So this topic of doing good well, just to break it down, means you're doing good in the world, but you're running it efficiently, effectively, and you're really using your assets to their full advantage. And I think that is going to be the key in all of these hybrids that we have going on here. And I would say that the organizations that we invest in are hybrids in a way, because, like I said, they take the best from the business world and the nonprofit world, but ours all operate as 501c3s. And when we are looking at a model and we're looking at a social entrepreneur, there's no track record and there's no way to know whether or not they haven't achieved anything in terms of hard results yet. But there are lots of indicators early on that a person and a model have the potential to be highly effective. And that's sort of the art of it. And that's what I and my staff have to figure out. And a lot of it comes from the personality of the leader and understanding whether or not the leader is thinking through future issues. Are they thinking about things like funding sustainability? And funding sustainability can be anything from a revenue model or a partial revenue model, or it could just be a diversified charitable funding base. Those are both sustainable models. And it doesn't hurt if they're a great fundraiser and they like to fundraise. Because you'll always be fundraising for whether you're in a hybrid or in a pure nonprofit. And we also look for measurement down the road. So it's very important when you're starting a venture that you think about how you're going to measure results for all different audiences, for yourself so that you can make adjustments along the way, for investors so that they know whether or not you're doing well, for your staff so that they can make changes independent of you and your vision, and just so that 5 or 10 years down the road you have some numbers to show the world whether or not you've done well. And those have to be set up from the very beginning, and you need to think through those from the beginning. And other important things when you're starting up an organization so that it's run well is a strong board. And you won't have your strong board right from the beginning, but it should be in your mindset. You should be thinking about who are the right people to help me guide this organization in the future. And included in that will be experts in your social area. There'll be people with wealth or access to wealth. It's a very important part. And people who understand governance and have a similar vision to you about where the organization is going. And you'll build this board slowly over time as you learn what you need and what you want in your guidance sphere. It's better to sort of build that slowly. Tim can probably talk to that. You need helpers, but you don't want to build a board of 10 people right away and then realize you need to go back and change it. So I think that so governance and getting your measurement and evaluation, at least thinking about it from the very beginning, are important things for growth.
Kirsten?
A couple of the things that I often find myself working with clients on, especially when they're starting a social enterprise, and even if they've already launched one but maybe didn't do the appropriate levels of planning ahead of time, is really being clear and obvious about what your goals are. And that seems quite obvious, but often organizations will launch into a social enterprise without really clearly agreeing between their board and management and staff about what are the goals for this social enterprise, and to go through kind of this checklist of lots of different parts of the organization and how might the social enterprise affect it. And so looking at what is the social mission that you want to achieve through this enterprise. Some organizations, their major goal for the social enterprise is that, for example, it might be a job training and skills for the clients that they serve. And so if it breaks even, or if it provides 50 jobs, let's say, then that would be a success from the social mission standpoint. But then looking at from the profitability standpoint, what are you expecting? Is this something that really needs to throw off a lot of cash so that you can put that into your social mission and the other ways that you do your work? Or is this something that maybe does provide a very needed service for your clients, and therefore if it breaks even, then that's probably okay because it's a program that you're doing for your clients, but you're not expending money on it, or it's basically self-funded. But being clear about what those intents are, and then taking a look at the social venture idea and saying, does this idea have the potential that it could meet the social mission that we're looking for it to meet and have that impact? Could it also realistically meet the profitability goals that we're looking for? And then there's a whole set of other kinds of things to look at. One that I really suggest is taking a look at your risk tolerance. As an organization, or even if you're an individual looking at starting something, and saying what is the kind of the norm for the level of risk tolerance, and does that align with the realistic risk level of this particular venture? If it doesn't, is that something that the organization needs to work on then? And maybe it's an area that it kind of pushes the organization to take a few more calculated risks. Looking at the other impacts that it might have on your existing stakeholders. So I'll say, what if it failed? What might the different failure scenarios look like? And how could that impact your reputation, your stakeholders, and others that have an interest in your organization? And one client that I was recently working for does a lot of work with local sustainable agriculture, and they were vetting a bunch of ideas, and one of them was a distribution kind of a thing where they could get a lot of local products in and then distribute those to caterers and restaurants and all those kinds of things. And so, well, let's just, one of the things to consider is what if that failed or became, financially unviable? What if you ended up in a situation where you couldn't pay those local suppliers, and now you've actually done more harm than good? And it's not a reason not to do it, but it's something to think about, and to think about what could the potential negative impacts be of the work that you're doing, and take that into consideration, and then set up some kind of mitigation strategies for how you can mitigate some of those risks and move forward. But I have kind of this whole set of issues that I encourage organizations to work through when they're looking at either developing a new social enterprise or even scaling or moving forward with an existing social enterprise. So
I want to talk a little bit about the for-profit side, since that's what our experience is. So, what we did is we took, one of the sort of thoughts on how do you come up with a new business, or how do you build a business, is to sort of imitate somebody else and improve on it. So at the very beginning, as Working Assets got started, what we really used as a model was American Express, which today you wouldn't say we look anything like American Express, but at the time, totally legally, we copied an idea they had. So in the summer of 1985, they had a program where they donated a penny to restore the Statue of Liberty every time you used an American Express card. So we looked at that and said, well, once you restore the Statue of Liberty, it's restored for some amount of time. And aren't there worthy organizations, and can you do more than a penny? And so that was the genesis of what became Working Assets, is looking at what a very large company did and putting our own set of values. So we decided to focus our values, which are not necessarily American Express as a company. Many people in American Express, I'm sure, agree with our values. But we decided to put our own values on top of this company. And we recognized two things. One, we had to build a really good company. You had to be just as good as every other credit card company, or today phone company, wireless company. People, we can't charge more, although if you poll people, they think they pay more to be socially responsible, but they won't buy your product if it's more expensive. So our marketing has always been, we're the same price and we give you all these things. You get this, in fact, I think we have better customer service. I mean, a lot of things about working assets that are actually better, but you can't be worse. So if you're building a for-profit social enterprise, you will not survive if you expect people to compromise quality, convenience, whatever are the drivers in that business. They're not going to compromise those to buy from your company. We are also very innovative, and we use technology to help us innovate. So while we were very small, and we're actually still, I mean, we only have 80 people, and we're over a $100 million company. I mean, that's small to have 80 people running a $100 million company. We outsource as much as possible. So you are in a world where outsourcing is really easy. Outsource, 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 outsource. Don't try to be expert at everything. So we came up with what we wanted our phone bill to look like, which is probably the most interesting phone bill and most interesting bill in the country. Our customers in every poll say they love to open it because it's an activism newsletter. So I don't know how many of you get our phone bill, but every month it tells you how you could do something to help the environment or help the issues that you care about that Working Asset supports. So people open them right away. We have the same company that built that phone bill in 1991 is still managing that phone bill. They manage all the software on it, and they get it out the door. We don't have people at Working Assets who are writing computer programs to send out phone bills. We also don't have people doing customer service. We have people training people how to do customer service. So when you call Working Assets customer service, you will get someone who knows all about the nonprofits we funded and knows about the political actions on that month's phone bill, but they don't sit in our office in San Francisco. They're at a company whose expertise is in doing customer service. So I think that understanding your expertise is really important. So first is imitation is fine as long as it's legal. Second is outsource, outsource, outsource. Consistency is another big thing. I mean, it's unusual that Working Assets is still managed by the people who founded the company. I know that's unusual, but we have the same issue areas that we fund. So the way the program works is every time you use your phone service, we donate 1% into a pool for nonprofit groups. We're funding the same issue areas we funded 20 years ago. We've renamed them a little bit, so we don't have hunger, we have economic justice, but we're still funding the same kind of groups. And in fact, of the 16 groups we funded the first year, many of them have been on the ballot. And actually, this is our 20th year, so we're thinking of getting all 16 together for some event because it's been 20 years. And this has to do with scalability. Our first donations were $2,000. Those groups didn't know who we were. They didn't really care about us. But now that we give them $100,000, they are our partners. They're our allies. And so scale is important, but so is consistency. So consistency is really good to stick with a value message, stay with that message. Analytics. If you're not taking analytic classes, take them. Working Assets is probably still here because we are heavily analytically driven. So Paul, someone who works sitting over there, almost everyone in the marketing department knows what the value of a customer is because that's how we market. I mean, it is MBA all over it. But we are 20 years later, we're still here. Probably more impressively, we are the only company selling long-distance phone service in the country today. They're almost all gone, first of all. So MCI is essentially bankrupt and gone. AT&T has now been bought by SBC. Sprint is a wireless company. So we're still selling long distance. We're still signing people up for long distance only, which I'm sure none of you would ever do that. But we also have wireless. So we're looking towards the future for what we should do as a company. But because we're so analytically driven, we've been able to keep selling a product way past its product life cycle. Focus. So focus is a really key part, and I'm sure you see that in anybody's plan. And it sort of goes with this outsourcing. Don't try to do everything. Come up with a focus, do it really well, and move on to the next thing. So there was a period where we had like hundreds of marketing ideas, and we were really scattered. So you learn by doing it. So we made our mistakes, and so we just sat down and we went through this very analytic set of what is each of those. So one, direct mail, telemarketing. So you make your list of what you're going to do as a marketing department, and you say, well, what's the highest value? Let's tackle that first. And you come up with an analytical metric, and you do that. And then, of course, measuring impact. So what Working Assets we've always said that what we're going to do is we're going to donate 10 cents for your credit card, 1% of your phone service. That's measurable. You could be audited by accountants. They could say that's how much you donated. You could send a report to our customers. Actually, they get to vote on how to allocate that money. But there's a trail, there's a paper trail, there's a numbers trail. So it's very easy to say, yes, we're doing what we told you we were going to do. We're not going to promise that we're going to do something we can't do. And so what has been a pitfall for social enterprises is where they promise something that they can't do. So they promise, we try to use 100% post-consumer recycled paper, but since we know you can't always use that, we also have a tree planting program. So we said, what's the next step? The next step is a tree planting program, which has to go with values and consistency, but also makes it so we don't promise the kind of paper we're going to use, because sometimes you have a vendor who uses a paper you didn't want to use, but we could say every time, for all the paper we use, we plant trees. That's measurable. We can do it. It gets done. So.
Do you guys want to, I've got something, but
I just wanted to comment on what Laura said. I think that, the premise of everything that she just said absolutely applies in the nonprofit world as well, and in nonprofit social enterprise. And the focus thing is incredibly important. It's one thing that, I know maybe you see this too, Jenny, that a lot of organizations try to do so many different things that they end up not doing any of it really all that well, or that they have so many different opportunities and can be pulled in all these different directions and are hesitant to pick one or two of the highest leverage. And I think finding those high leverage opportunities, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit, is one of the most important things that you can do. And walking your talk is the other one. Yeah.
I think, it's interesting, and I of course, I'm admittedly biased. What you think depends on where you stand. I'm a guy that's running around and looking for money, quite honestly, to do what I'm doing, just like any entrepreneur, nonprofit or for-profit. And there are days when I wish, again, our whole topic here is kind of the emergence of this field, and people, just this crowd today is a case in point. How many hands would have been raised 10 years ago? Then begs the question, well, is .org, in my case, yesterday's .com. In other words, I'm not seeing, from my perspective, although there is all this interest, I don't think, it's really, I don't see quite the bubble and the craziness that we saw in this very area in terms of the internet economy years back. I'm curious to what you guys think in terms of, with all this interest and with all the momentum, are you seeing that translate into, for the people here today? Anybody with an idea can get something going, or is it gotten even harder with all the focus on metrics and some of the panels that these folks will see later today?
For the for-profit or the nonprofit?
Either.
That was a bubble the 98 to 2000 bubble will probably never be repeated. It may be, but so. That's not the way, when I went to start working assets, that's not the way, the world just doesn't really work that way, unfortunately. It'd be nice to think that but there is a lot more money out there today than there used to be. So in 1985, there wasn't a lot of capital, period. Apple was a small company. You look around the Silicon Valley, and even 85, a lot of the companies had started, but they were very small. So the good news is there is a lot of capital. The bad news is there are a lot of people trying to get that capital. But what I think is a way to get around that is, to not have a model that needs a lot of capital until you prove yourself. Because if you have a really good idea and it's working, so Jumpstart, for example, they have measurable statistics that show that the kids who go through their program, so these 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds, when they can measure how, so their premise is that, and I know Rob Walters, that's what I'm talking about, but the premise is that the average, sort of middle-class child knows like 20,000 words when they get into kindergarten, and that the children in disadvantaged families know about 6,000. So you could test whether after the end of 2 years they have their vocabulary is 20,000. That's very measurable. And then you can do other studies that other people have done to show if you know the 20,000, you're going to have this kind of path academically. Very measurable. So they didn't raise millions of dollars to start the organization. They raised enough money to start the pilots to show that this works. And then they started rolling it out, and the money followed their success. I think a lot of it, that's why we're talking so much about focus, measurability, and that's your story. People give money to stories. They give money to stories that are in the nonprofit sector and the for-profit sector that hit them as something that they would like to see happen in the world.
And this is where I was kind of hoping that this would go, is because what we saw, the parallel I was trying to draw was we saw in the .com sense all of this infrastructure. God knows how many foosball tables, right? But all of this infrastructure, and getting back to one of Jenny's first points, yet at the same time, often in the nonprofit world, you're asked to, okay, it's you, in my case, working out of the converted janitor's closet in the school where I taught over in East Palo Alto, the East Palo Alto Charter School, and that's more the path. So I mean, what are you seeing in terms of trends in the nonprofit world?
Well, there's no doubt that the environment is much more friendly to social entrepreneurs. The fact that anybody knows what the word means. By the way, people don't know what the word means outside of probably the Bay Area, New York, Boston, Seattle. I mean, but it is coming out, and there are supportive environments, especially in urban areas, and it's an area that business people like to fund, and business people have the wealth. So it is becoming easier to get backing for your ventures. But that doesn't mean it's easy. Being a social entrepreneur is a very hard job. And you really have to be passionate about what you're doing and very excited about your idea. And I think focus is a very important thing to keep in mind. Really do one thing well. And if you're thinking about starting it as a team, my suggestion is to really think about what the roles of the various teammates are. And I will tell you, and this doesn't really go out of the room, but the best entrepreneurial ventures that I see are started by one person, not co-CEOs. And it's not very, you would think that, co would be better than one, but there's something about a single person being able to direct the vision of an organization. And a very strong number two is incredibly valuable. But there's definitely somebody who is the face person and the fundraiser, and somebody who is the get it done. And if you can find that combo, it's fantastic. But you really need to have a clear focus on your idea and a clear focus of what your teammates are doing. Otherwise, it's just too hard.
Kirsten, you're nodding. We're going to open it up to questions right after this.
No, I'm nodding from personal experience.
Yeah.
I had a business partner for a while, and I think it's a misnomer to say that you're equal partners, and that starting something with a partner as if you were equal partners is not realistic, and that you need other people. It's not that you just have to do it all alone. You need other people, but you have to be clear about who's doing what and the roles and responsibilities. And I completely agree that being a social entrepreneur is a really difficult thing to do, because you're not only an entrepreneur and all the things that are inherently difficult about that, but you're also trying to achieve a social mission and all the things that are inherently difficult about that. And so I think that it has to be your just real internal fire and passion and drive that gets you through those kind of repeated roadblocks. And it's hard for that to come out fully when there are two people that are looking at it from a different perspective and might have different ideas for what it might look like. And so.
Sure. I just want to chime in for the not being the sole. So that might be what you're seeing, but Working Assets was not. I'm not the sole founder. So there were several of us who co-founded it, and we actually didn't know each other, which I think is part of why.
Is there one CEO or co-CEOs?
There's one CEO.
That's
different.
I mean, we're run as a company. I mean, so I know that companies now have, offices with a chairman, have three people, but there is one CEO. But I think it's interesting that we didn't know each other in advance, because our skills are very complementary. One of the partners who started is no longer involved day to day, but the other one, I mean, we've been running the company for 20 years, and it works marvelously, or so I believe. Well, that's Paul figures. So it certainly has. So I don't think you should only assume that you shouldn't, start something with somebody. But I think it's interesting that we didn't know each other until we were working together. Yeah.
So we've gone to from kind of the theoretical now to some good anecdotal. So I just want to open it up, and why don't we start with Paul? Paul, is Working Assets a well-run company? Honestly, just go ahead and raise your hand. I'll repeat everybody's question so it gets on the record. But yeah.
We've talked a lot about good either nonprofit or for-profit startups. Some of the attributes they have in terms of the leadership and the business model and things like this. But I think any good startup starts with an unmet need and one that's substantial. And I'd just sort of like to hear a little bit about how you all think about evaluating that need, the scale, the size of it, sort of the magnitude of it. And on the other hand, how do you start with a sort of a general idea of a need and drive towards something more concrete?
I think you were actually close enough that probably picked up, guys.
So we look at social needs in all social areas. It's it's an interesting job because we'll look at everything from environmental issues to youth and family, et cetera, on and on and on. And it's interesting. I think social entrepreneurs look at social problems a little bit differently than a pure nonprofit person or a pure business person. They look for a tremendous amount of need, but they look for opportunities within that need. We'll take Room to Read, which is the organization she talked about building schools. They look for developing countries that don't have libraries or schools, or the girls don't go to school. But they don't operate in countries where there isn't a strong rule of law, or there isn't a teacher infrastructure where teachers are, they've certain checklists of where they will go build their libraries in their schools. And so one person could argue, well, there's needier people in Afghanistan who need a library. And they could say, but I can operate in Cambodia because there's rule of law, and I know that school will not be taken over by rebels, and I know that the girls that we send to school will actually get to school because I can have social workers on the ground making sure they're going to school. So I think that there's an opportunistic place in the middle that you just have to be strong enough when both sides argue against it. To really say, hey, this is where I can do the maximum amount of good with my skills, my team skills, and the money I have.
Can I also, I actually teach it here at Stanford, but at the undergraduate, and we teach a course on sort of, we call it a collaboratory, where people they come up with they come to the class because they've identified something they feel passionate about. So I think passion, which you talked about before, is really important. But then we actually, they're undergraduates, we walk them through sort of how you would write a business plan. And so as you're doing that, and one of the things we didn't talk about is who else is doing who else has identified that unmet need, if they have, and how are they addressing it. And so if you take the analytic sort of business plan approach to a nonprofit, it is very effective. But you do need to worry about sort of competitive. We haven't talked about competitive, competition, right, and then the whole risk piece. But I think the passion has a lot to do with if you've identified an unmet need, and then you have really answered sort of every possible question of someone sort of saying, but what about this, what about that, and you're passionate about it, then that helps you get your foot in the door.
Yeah. I think another important piece about evaluating that need and looking at the competitiveness is looking at, if you've got this really great idea that clearly is could meet a need, and you're looking at the competitive environment and there's nobody else in that competitive environment, then that should be a sign for you as well. And then I would then ask the question, why is there nobody else in this particular space? And maybe it's because nobody else has just done it. Maybe it's because other people have tried and they haven't done it well and haven't been able to succeed. So then you want to know why. But so don't just see that as a clear oh yay, there's nobody else here. But then ask the next questions and just drill down a little bit further and a little bit further.
Yeah.
I'd like to actually follow up on that. It presents a little bit of a conundrum, doesn't it? Because you start this venture because you see a need, and then traditionally, if you were a normal entrepreneur, a for-profit venture, you would want to erect barriers to anybody else coming in and try to very quickly gain scale, get patents, whatever else you would do to keep other people out. Yet here you are starting this venture for a social good, and you don't necessarily want to do that, do you? So how do people deal with that? What does that kind of play out, or has it yet?
Well, so if you're starting a social venture, in essence, you want people to come in and imitate you. But you don't want them to come in and imitate you in your backyard or where you want to dominate. And our social entrepreneurs in our program, our fellows, are very competitive. And it's interesting. They do see competition, and they do think that they do it better than anyone else. That's part of it, sort of the cockiness of anybody who thinks that they can start something and run it, right? You need that. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think it's somewhere where you decide what's your territory and you want to own that territory. You need to own it for fundraising reasons. You need to own it for quality and control reasons. And you want to be the one doing it. Now, there's always a sub-strategy, which is, okay, in the areas that I have not tagged as mine, how do I get other people to do it well like I do it? How do I get people to imitate me? And that's getting to enough scale and having some results where you can then talk to the universe of people in your space and try to get them to do things in an efficient and effective way as you have done. Or potentially a dissemination strategy where you get people to choose countries or cities where you don't want to be. And it's always a trade-off between control and scale. And I think most of our entrepreneurs have decided that they would like to build enough scale to show quality and control and then invite people to the table years later. But they're all different models of scale.
Social change is not a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
So selling cars might be a zero-sum game, but so you shouldn't go into it as a nonprofit if you think it's a zero-sum game. I mean, we would like nothing more during all these years if AT&T had decided to donate 1% of their revenue. I mean, that would have been, we could have gone home. You know, so yes, you can be really competitive, and yes, we want to be. There really is no one in working asset space, sort of doing exactly what we're doing. But we would love if somebody really big would copy us. So that's one thing that may not be.
But I don't think you would like somebody to come in and market themselves as the social justice telephone company and steal your customers and not do as much good.
Well, except for the fact we're being taped, I could tell you 2 stories that would go along with that. But
oh, come on, we're all friends here, right? Come on.
Don't say on tape what you don't want. So, there are competitors to working assets, but you need every piece. So, I mean, there is one. There's one that's still there called Earth Tones, which is started by. In fact, they said they're started by nonprofits. That in 1991, when we were raising money to start the phone service, they said their nonprofit said, "Oh, we'll invest in you." So we gave them our business plan, and we spent hours and hours with them, and then they started the same thing. I think they have 1,000 customers. We have 300,000 customers. I mean, they might have, but they never reached the scale we did. So has anyone here heard of Earth Tones? And some of you have heard of working assets. So if you're doing things, so here we gave them our whole, they saw our whole business plan, and they're a nonprofit, so we're not going to go sue a nonprofit for starting, that's sort of your point. I mean, we're not going to go sue a nonprofit for starting something that looks like working assets. But in the end, they couldn't do everything we could do. So they couldn't do the phone bill the way we did the phone bill. So we ended up with a competitive advantage, which is our phone bill. And then we ended up with scale. So we ended up, which took a little bit of time because, of course, they saw us before we started the phone service. Anyway, so.
A couple of people that you can ask about this that I think are panelists later in the conference. One, I know Paul Rice from Transfer USA is a panelist. And what Transfer USA does is they're kind of the United States certification agency for fair trade coffee. And there's been a big change in that industry where now there's a whole bunch of different types of marks or certifications beyond just what Transfer does. And it, I think, would be a very interesting question to pose to Paul about that, because on one hand, that's squeezing them a bit. On the other hand, potentially it's ultimately getting their social mission out there more. So I think it would be interesting to see what he has to say about that. And then the other one that just came to mind, and I thought he was a panelist, but now I'm not sure, is Jim Fruchterman at Benetech. And they use, Jim, I think, is a Stanford grad, and they use technologies, information technology that has social purpose applications. And that would be another one to ask. I think he's on a panel, but I'm not sure. But definitely try to go to Paul's and ask him that question.
And just as an aside, and then we'll go to one more, another question. I think an interesting thing here that we also see, a differentiation between nonprofit and for-profit, is there's also some social entrepreneurs on the nonprofit side that argue pretty convincingly that actually their goal is extinction.
Right.
To take it to the next level. If I'm in the teacher retention business,
Yep.
because low-income public schools do a horrible job of recognizing and retaining talent, ultimately my vision needs to be extinction, that they don't need me as the pebble in their shoe to do that.
Can I ask a question? Can you tell everybody about what you're doing? Like a little more. No, what Tim's doing is really great. So can you tell? I think you should tell them a little more about.
Okay.
If they don't, unless they all know. Do they all know?
Okay. The whole idea behind Rise is as I mentioned just very briefly. I taught across the way in East Palo Alto, where I just saw firsthand a lot of bright people coming into teaching through programs like Teach for America and others, and those programs are really working hard on the induction piece, getting people in, training them, supporting them in the first couple of years. But then, of course, people, it's a tough job, and 70% of all new teachers leave within 5 years. So Rise's innovation is to say, well, let's come at this whole idea of quality, effective teacher shortages in low-income public schools, not solely from the supply side, but as a retention issue. Let's say, the problem is good people come in and then leave just when they're getting good, and this revolving door means that the neediest kids get the neediest teachers. So we recognize good, effective teachers, and that's our core competency, and that's the nucleus of the model. Once we found good, effective teachers, I can connect them with one another, and they're happy. I can connect donors with them who don't want to support bureaucracy or don't want to support ineffective teachers, and they're happy because these donors don't have the infrastructure or ability to find good, effective teachers. And lastly, I can connect teachers with other schools, because if a teacher says, hey, Rise, thanks for the network, thanks for the dollars, but I don't feel valued here, so I'm going to go to a more affluent school or leave teaching, then we'll help introduce that pre-screen teacher to another school.
There's one more piece of what you're sorry, I don't mean, but I think what you're doing is a complete hybrid, and it's really wonderful because you're receiving some fees for your placement.
Absolutely.
So he's not only dependent on foundation dollars. I mean, anyway, so I think it's wonderful.
But and thank you. I mean, and I just that. Again, I mean, that, as I said earlier, these are my heroes, so that does mean a lot to me. But the whole point is it touches on something that also came up earlier. I mean, this was just, to your question about the need, I mean, this was me in the classroom seeing that people were coming in and then people were leaving. So, 2 cents there would just be that's where often the best stuff comes up, is looking at other organizations and then looking at, wow, Teach for America gets them in, and then here's KIPP trying to get people to be principals, and here's other programs trying to get people to be master teachers, but if everybody leaves between years 2 and 5, where are we going to go? Other questions?
Yes. Just curious about the social enterprise model as a business model. Do you think in the future that it's possible that enterprises today, which are smaller grassroots organizations, could grow into large national or international organizations? Is it possible that Toyota could be a green business throughout?
Yes. Or else I think if it makes good, if it makes good business sense. I mean, what the bottom line, when I was doing this, we didn't have all these terms, but what we figured out is we needed to be a good business proposition. Social change only makes sense if it's also a good business sense. So, for Toyota, it ended up being a fabulously profitable decision to develop the hybrid car. Does that mean they are a green? I mean, are they a green company? There are lots of ways to. I mean, I don't think they're, or they're a green company in that definition. Are they a green company in every definition? And are they also like the best employer? I mean, there are lots of levels of sort of social responsibility. So when you look at AT&T when they started recycling paper, which probably happened 15 years ago, but the person who did that told them to recycle their paper because they were going to get paid, and you got paid to have those bins out there. The recyclers would actually pay you for that paper. So I think it will work as long as we keep the focus on that it has to make good business sense. Otherwise, it becomes, in some ways, it then becomes a nonprofit. And the beauty of today's world is that there's a lot of money. I mean, there's a lot of money out there for nonprofits also. So to be a for-profit and succeed, I think you need to have a really good business model where the social responsibility is part of it. So, I mean, Working Assets' business model is that we donate this money to nonprofit groups. We are completely driven by our passion, but when you look at it as a business model, we have lower marketing costs, we have higher retention, which is sort of and in an industry where those are two very big costs. So at the end of the day, why do we exist? We probably exist because our donations are less than the marketing costs and the attrition costs at the other phone companies.
Well, I think it also comes back to what you started with, Laura, which was around the consumer and the power of the consumer. And for it to be a good business model, make good business sense, there has to be something that the consumer really wants. And that's what we saw with the hybrid for Toyota and some of these other things. And it shows the power for all of us to kind of make our choices by how we make our purchases. And I know that there are different models being worked on to make that even easier for people to do. And Greg Steltenpohl, who's speaking later as well, is working on the Intera project, and that's kind of the big thrust of Intera is really helping people make values-based purchases and be able to spend their money at businesses and with products that align with their own values. So.
Probably have time for 2 more questions, and then we want to make kind of a curriculum connection in terms of some things here at Stanford. So, yeah.
Well, I'm hearing a lot of comments about things that I see specifically as corporate social responsibility practices, and I wanted to differentiate between that and social enterprise and hear from you guys how you define those two things. I think they are very different. Having a mission and being driven by a mission, which is what social enterprise is very different from incorporated practices, which do increase your bottom line and do, increase your profit rate and your productivity, but it's not necessarily mission driven. So hearing from you guys how you differentiate those two practices, those two.
So the differentiation between corporate social responsibility and then social enterprise.
Just do it quickly.
Well, I don't agree. So because I'm looking at the ends, and at the end of the day, if Toyota was driven for profit mode, that's the point, because we don't all agree. So if Toyota was driven for profit motive or for environmental motives, the end of the day is they had a huge environmental impact. And if everyone in this country drove a hybrid, we probably would never have had to go to war for oil. So, so that's the bottom line, what the end result is. So, anyway, so maybe that's my cynicism. As I said, I would have loved AT&T to have donated 1% of their long distance revenue too to nonprofits. So. So that's why I don't get into the semantics.
Yeah, I agree with that, and you can tell that I read the conference booklet during Al Gore's speech today because I know all the different things that are happening. But Jed Emerson, I think, is doing a thing that the title is somewhat inflammatory, but I agree with where he's coming from, which was it was like beyond CSR, social enterprise, and other mind-limiting whatever it was. But I think the point is around that, and the work that he's done around the blended value map is that it's a systemic change in the way that we look at social issues, the way that money works, the way that we look at all these things that have traditionally been these very clean-cut silos of like government, nonprofit, for-profit, and call it what you will. There's lots of different terms for it, but again, I don't think it's worth getting into a lot of focus on the semantics. It's the purpose that matters.
Although I think, if I can interpret it a different way, there's a difference between running your business more efficiently and agreeing as a board to put a certain percentage into another organization doing social good, and then there is an organization that does social good. I mean, the Red F portfolio of organizations actually employs underemployed people. That's a very hard job. They build businesses so that people who have tough time getting jobs take jobs. Those will never scale.
Yeah.
But they're doing good, and it's a great model to sort of to work at. That's very different than working assets, which is dedicated itself to devoting a certain amount of their profits so that other people can do social good. And I think that it's important to think about which of those things you want to do.
Let's get one last question. Sure.
Yeah, but my question is for Jane. I'm just wondering, you talked about how you need a good model and then also you need a good leader. I'm wondering if you guys get more models that don't match up with good leaders, and whether you keep those models and try and find good leaders who might be out there that are having trouble finding models.
The founder and the model, almost by definition for a social enterprise or a social entrepreneurial venture, have to come together. It would be very difficult, even for a for-profit, to find a great product and try to find a CEO to start it. You could maybe get a CEO a couple years down the road, but the first couple of years are so about the person whose passion is behind it. And you can have a relatively mundane model, and I mean mundane is that, if someone just told you about it, you might say, meh, and a fabulous leader, and it will be highly successful. Building libraries in developing countries is a boring idea that is a rocket ship because of the leader John Wood. We have seen fabulous models with so-so leaders. They will never take off. But I can't go find somebody who cares about this model. But if I find a leader that just has some gaps, what I will do is try to find the right COO, the right board members, the right advisors to bolster the maybe missing pieces of that leader's skill set or experiences.
So given the number of MBAs, current MBAs that we have in the room. I think we wanted to take just one, maybe a minute and a half or so. There are some opportunities in social entrepreneurship here in Stanford. Does anybody have? I was under the impression you guys were familiar, or somebody. Nope, and we're clear. So look around at this great university because there are abundant opportunities. Now, there is a class in the business school.
If you're at school here, come see me. I mean, the undergraduate has one of the few programs in the country, which is there's a series of about 4 courses. There's a course about defining social innovation and entrepreneurship. There's a sort of academically rigorous course which teaches a set of skills. I'm co-teaching the collaboratory, which is where people write business plans. And then there are several other classes at the school that sort of fit in. So there's an engineering course where they actually pick a problem every year to solve, and they work on it for the whole year. So one of the and they use the technology of the Stanford Engineering School. So one of the problems was clean water in third world countries. So they built these solar water cookers. So anyway, so at Stanford, you look in the course catalog. They're currently under urban studies, but there is this series of courses on social innovation, entrepreneurship. That would be great if they were taken to other universities.
So use your alumni network. Come see me whether you're at Stanford or not. If you have an idea, and the MBA network, almost at all the schools that are probably represented here, have alumni who would be happy to vet ideas with you and think about the right people to surround yourself with.
Yeah. And so 2 last things. 1, show of hands of people who are actually going to another social entrepreneurship now that you had your... I
think it's fewer.
Oh, it's fewer.
Oh, no. Well,
come on.
They need to know.
A real vote. That wasn't a real vote.